I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Nia is Associate Professor at the University of Utah's College of Health. She also holds similar positions at other universities in the US. We call her the jack of all trades in research because a lot of her research work spans across different areas of health, including cancer, diabetes, physical activity, health and education. In the US, our Pacific colleagues call her the Queen of the Pacific because she's fierce, but she also is very competent in over 10 Pacific languages. And she also commands the service of the community for the community, and this is why I love Nia so much. Please join me in welcoming Associate Professor Nia Aitaoto.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. An honor to be here. And I bring you warm Pacific greetings from the Northern Pacific. And we do share an ocean, so we have a homeland in the Pacific, air and sea. So we are brothers and sisters. And my talk will focus mainly on the Northern Pacific. There are U.S. jurisdictions. So from the Republic of Palau, the Federal State of Micronesia, Guam, Saipan, Republic of the Marshall Islands, and we have one territory in the south of the equator, which is American Samoa. But I also from the state of Hawaii, and then we'll talk more about all those different areas, and that's actually where I work. And then I also do work in the continental U.S. So these are the Pacific Islanders in the U.S. We're still less than 1% of the United States, but this map shows where Pacific Islanders are at. So we love the ocean. So most of us are, right in this corner right here, Alaska, California, Washington State, and Oregon. But at the same time, more and more are moving towards the middle because land is cheaper. Industries are there that work in military. And I'm a community-based researcher, and you're wondering now exactly where am I based. I actually was based in the Western Pacific for 15 years, and then according to census, between 1990 and 2000, we actually have a negative population growth because majority of the people were moving to the continental U.S. And I never lived in a continental U.S., so I decided to move along with my community to see what's going on up there. And so I'm actually currently based out of the University of Utah, but I was at the University of Arkansas here. So I do work in all of different sites, the U.S. Pacific, Hawaii as a state, and the continental U.S. And my role was actually, I started out as a program evaluator and planner. So I was in every day looking for evidence, right? Because in the U.S., they're like, we're not giving you the money until you show us evidence it's going to work. But a lot of the evidence that was there was evidence from the continental U.S., and I'm stuck under a coconut tree in Pohnpei. I'm like, okay, really? So that's my journey. So my journey was going into evidence, trying to find evidence, moving it back and forth. So my journey is very, very different. I'm jet lagged all the time because I have to travel. I'm in the university. I also set it up that way where I'm at a university setting for about 1 week out of the month, and the remaining time I'm in Hawaii or in the Western Pacific. So it's very interesting life. But around nutrition narratives, I think in health we talk a lot about diseases and then obesity. So for the places where I work, we are the top 10, 9 of the top 10 most obese countries in the world is in the Pacific region. And American Samoa is part of where I work. Palau, do some work with the Kiribati because of its proximity to the Marshall Islands. So a lot of that work, in academia, we talk about obesity and then, of course, disease. We have the most Western Pacific, the diabetes epidemic. So around nutrition, that is the narrative. But in the Western Pacific, American Samoa has the highest rate of diabetes at 47% of population over the age of 18 have type 2 diabetes. And then that is old data. So if you look at it, every time we talk about nutrition, it's always around diabetes, obesity, and disease and things like that. Look at our fruits and vegetable intake, consume less than 5 servings. It's in the 90s. A lot of places it's actually 98% consume less than 5 fruits and vegetables a day. So all of that in my field of health, that's what we talk about. But before I go on with my talk, I just want to remind everyone that that was not always the case. in the early 1800s, this is what the first Europeans saw in the Northern Pacific, the Carolinian Islands. People always ask me what they're doing. I say, we invented the hokey pokey. So, but look at their physique. They were very healthy. They were impressed. They were with that. And then also we were colonized by multiple powers, So it was the Spanish, it was the Germans, and the Japanese. So this is a group of our nutritionists. Actually, these are Palauan healers because the healers were actually nutritionists, right? A lot of the healing, 90% of the medicine that they recommend was actually food that you eat, right? And things like that. And actually, this picture was taken, it was right before the Germans took them from Palau, in this side of the Pacific, over to Saipan because they were called troublemakers, right? Because a lot of the community was listening more to the nutritionists than everybody else. Like, well, don't you wish that was the case right now? So they would have to take all of them and then say, you have too much power in the community, so we're gonna take you over to the jail. So the prison was in Saipan. But then after World War I, going into World War II, so Japanese actually got most of that area between World War I and World War II. The Western Pacific was under the Japanese rule, but you know what happened in World War II. And then right after, bomb of Pearl Harbor, the United States went and actually bombed all of those islands. They were under the Japanese rule. From the Marshall Islands all the way down to Palau, everything, food, and so we didn't have any of the plants, all the food that we were familiar with, even the fish was contaminated. And then so in the 1900s, we were under the American rule, at that time. So this picture shows, this is Kwajalein. I work a lot in this part of the Pacific, but this is the introduction of canned food. Right? So it's the first time we actually see canned food for the population, and we couldn't eat any of our food. So they bring in rice. That was actually introduction of rice. Because early on in the Japanese rule, rice was for Japanese, right? And we still eat our kalo, our bananas and things like that. But after World War II, they wanted to bring in potatoes and all that kind of stuff. Also, this is where they introduced turkey tail. And I said, darn American, they kept the turkey and gave us the ass. So, that alone is a social justice system, right? So even thinking, I started out as a community organizer, just the thought of them, keeping that whole turkey. A lot of Pacific people still don't know what the whole turkey looks like. But anyway, that was the introduction of processed food and everything like that. It's amazing. I love this other picture because this is the military guy, making sure people are not getting the canned food. So I always tell my community, don't you wish somebody is at the store with a gun and say, don't touch that pisupo, put it down and things like that. So all of this narrative in our community around nutrition was around this area. Also, this is when the U.S. was testing the atomic bomb. So this is the area where they tested atomic bombs. So of course, all of the protein from the ocean, they're still cleaning up to this day, a lot of the effects of the atomic bomb, but it affects our nutrition and things. And then they sent in a Navy health survey in the 1940s to see our unhealthy Pacific Islander before they take over, early 40s. But they found just intestinal parasite, yaws, TB, and skin disease, complete absence of malnutrition or obesity, no indication of diabetes, and no hypertension. So between that survey and right now, where we have the highest rate of diabetes, something happened. And then so this part of the narrative in the community, we're trying to figure out exactly what happened to us. So we started to have, so when I started in health, I didn't start off, on health. We just want to figure out what happened. I was pre-law, I was looking at social justice, so I did community assessment. So the way that we talk about health is our social and cultural norms and values around nutrition. We love a feast in the Pacific, you know what I mean? It's our weddings, it doesn't matter what the bride wears, if the food is good, everything is fine. So, and all that kind of stuff. And then our belief system, we have a lot of cultural thing that's attached to our food, our heritage. So there's that part, we need to change that, and if the community wants to change that, but there's also structure and influence, because we had this exercise where community people, we were at a conference and we had lunch, and I told everybody look at your plate. Do you know where your food come from? Like who actually decide how to get there, who process it and things like that. Came to find out 100% of the food came on a boat. So this conference was in the Pacific. So some kind of boat had to there. So therefore, whoever made the decision on that food was outside of our domain, and how to figure out how to get that back. So also looking at, so I'll talk more about some of the things that we're doing there, and then also environmental settings, our homes, our school, and our workplaces, all of that, because you don't just eat food at home or whatever else, you eat it in a group. But then also individual factors, I love, nutrition research, because also it's how I feel about food too, and our palate. Last night at dinner we talked about like the taste. A lot of Pacific Islander, we have this taste for salt. But we never did have a lot of heavy salty food in the past. So we talk about that as a community. So what we did, but each of the sectors, so that's why in my talk I have a long title. It's a Pacific talk. Long name, at the end of the day, is Junior. The name of the boy is Junior, but long name. But all of that, but each of these sectors, so all my work is around this sector, because as a researcher, we want to focus on our research. At the end of the day, you have to look at the context where it sits, right? But if you look at it, all of this sector is not static, right? It actually has its own rhythm, and then so we have to work with the overall rhythm of the community. Right now, we're going through a dengue epidemic. So all the nutrition work has to stand up by where we're focused on dengue, right? So all of that, but how does it fit in, right? Because you still have to eat with dengue. So, as people do community work, have to make sure that we have to respect the overall rhythm. But also, our focus have to on research on all sector. So even though I do a lot of community research, 80% of my work is outside of health folks. So it's really fun because, they talk about everything else, and I just remind them the reason why we're doing it is because we're unhealthy people. So I'll talk, more about that. Sorry about that. So the first thing is example from social and cultural norms. We want to change from daily meals to celebration and feasts. So this is Saipan. So Saipan is majority Catholic. So they have this tradition of 9 days of prayers. When somebody died, they have 9 days of prayers, and they feast like this for 9 days, and the person died of diabetes. So, and then it's a competition, like this day, then tomorrow we'll add one more meat. So it's like 9 types of meat and all that kind of thing. And we have these citizen panels. We bring them together and then say, what we need to change. The most interesting about those citizen panels is that we didn't focus on health. We say, let's just talk about ourselves. What's making us happy, what's making us healthy, and all, anything. So the citizen panel, just for the nutrition part and health, they say that we need to, there's a rethinking process that we need to go through. What is good food, right? So in the Pacific, the definition of good food is meat, is a lot of fat, and that kind of thing. We have a whole set of food. But then also we need to reconstruct feasting and celebration. Because came to find out in Saipan during the war that 9 days of prayer, it was actually prayer. All they had was a cup of tea and a cracker. None of this stuff was going on, things like that. But see how we evolved, you know what I mean? We're like, hey. So we have all of this, and then so now we need to change that. And the next question is, who is going to change it? So we actually, not specific people. If God says put that down, we will. So we actually work with the faith leaders. We actually work with their bishop. So the bishop actually have this healthy feasting policy where he reversed it. He says, we're going to go back to the cracker and tea for the 8 days, but on the last day, we're actually going to bring in a nutritionist and give you a menu. Only if you eat this, that we will engage with with the funerals and things like that. But not just funerals, weddings, and things like that. So the good thing about this kind of policy is that it's not just a policy that we developed for them. They came up with a policy. They also asked for appropriate technical assistance because they're like, so what is healthy food? So there was a debate on that. So we brought in Department of Health to provide all the nutritionists and work together with the community to come up with the menu, but then also how to cook it. It was amazing how many Pacific people did not know how to cook their traditional dishes the traditional way. They substitute a lot of things there too. So we had that policy. We also have a water or new, the coconut, only. So anytime we do a celebration, they're not allowing any other like soda or pops and things like that, just water. So that was their thing. But they also add a physical activity around cooking because a lot of the food, they were trying to cheat. They get the coconut from the can. But if you're in the island, then you have to climb the coconut, get your own coconut. So it was a fun way of them coming up with that. But it's around policy. So those kind of policies, a community policy, is a policy that they agreed upon with the help and consultation of the health professionals and things like that. But the priest that actually started, he was a priest that was a bishop that started off. He actually became a bishop 2 years ago and actually took our policy to the Pope. and tell them, it's like, hey, we need to look, as they do have funding for malnutrition, but looking at obesity as a form of malnutrition, of all these things. So we see a lot of our young priests and our young faith leaders actually moving some of our issues up front. So that's an example of how we do our own local policies and things like that. We also look at decolonizing men's role in nutrition, because in the past, men did all the cooking. We want to go back. But so they did a lot of the heavy cooking, right? They have the cookhouse, men were cooking that. And in Micronesia, there's actually some dishes that only men can cook it. Women cannot cook the fafa and things like that, and haven't eaten that in like 10 years, so they need to step it up. So we have a men cooking class looking at dishes and things like that. We also have men doing the shopping and then, negotiating prices and things, because we want to bring them back. Because, we have this thing where in the US, per capita, more Pacific men are fighting wars in the military than any other ethnic group. So here we are, Pacific warrior going to war. They cannot even cook a meal. So say, let's start fighting with the, cook first before you go. So we have this decolonizing of men bringing back that power of nourishing their families. So that is some of the cultural things that we're looking at, having the community policy or policies. But the other thing, sector of influence, is our agriculture. So we have different types of islands. So this is American Samoa. They're mountainous island, what we call high islands. But we also have atolls. So some of our jurisdiction is like they're living between these trees. So all there. So the kind of nutritious food that's there, the food sources, we're also looking at that. So we noticed that for high islands, they actually have more variety of food and things like that, but then sea-based. So as nutrition research, we actually work with other folks, especially around biodiversity, because we're just eating one type of, we only have this one type of taro, but in the past we had like 50 varieties of taro, bananas, and that kind of thing. So we're much more interested on that kind of things. But then also when we moved to the continental US, when I moved, this is my current home of Salt Lake City, Utah. But all the food producers, people that are doing, producing foods, and if you look at it, it's only 2% of U.S. land is for fruits and vegetables that we consume. The rest of the businesses, things like that, is for other things, to feed the cows and all the other stuff there too. So all these food producers, but the narrative around communities, specific communities in the US, we also want a control of that. Like, we want a voice. We feel that a lot of policies is going on without our voices. So what we do is that we're building a lot of advocacy groups and coalition. So the most interesting about this coalition is 20 years in the making, but we went around and talked about our civic engagement. More Pacific Islander ran for office and won in the last 10 years because of these coalitions. So it's a very interesting exercise. So we put up pictures like this and say, who ran for office? And I remember one election, we told everybody for running physically and run for office. So, because both would do us good. So everybody run for office. It doesn't matter where we lose. And we were surprised people won their election because it started in the community. But when they went in, as part of their drive is on nutrition and pre-diabetes. The interesting about this is that for the United States, we do have reimbursed in insurance. When you get sick, go to the doctor and get reimbursed. Our pre-diabetes program is now reimbursed by insurance. It's part of your health reimbursement. 20 years of advocacy, when people go in and advocate for what they want. So when you go in, it's the first time in the US where they actually reimburse for nutritious counseling and things like that. So usually the medical model is only when you're sick, then they reimburse, right? But now they're doing that. So a lot of work, not just for Pacific people, but all people went around to advocate for things like that. So there is power of us advocating, not only that, but also advocating in academia, because now I'm fairly new at research. I've only been in academia for 5 years. It feels like people think that I've been there forever. No, actually I was a gangster from the street. And then I want to know what's going on in academia, but I didn't know my gangster skill also apply over there. So, so I'm like, hey, look familiar? But looking at that kind of thing, but looking at like who does the request for application, right? A lot of our Pacific issues and things like that, they're not in the application. And when we apply, people who actually review our application, they don't know our context. So they always come up with these little points about stuff. Of course, we roll our eyes, but I don't want to roll my eyes. I want to go there and tell them what's going on. So we advocate to be at the table to review grant app in the United States, because there's a saying, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, they're eating you up. So a lot of these movements are for us Pacific people to be around this table, and we're proud of that. So that's a sector of influence around academia and things, but also around marketing and media. We could never compete with media. I mean, marketing, they have so much money. So, I mean, if you look at spam, you know, we make fun of spam. We got to spam everything. But spam, they're so good at marketing. So in one of my jurisdictions in Guam, they have this Liberation Day when the U.S. came in and liberate them from the Japanese stuff. So it's the biggest holiday that they have. Every year, spam has a special Liberation Day spam for them and things like that. So it's amazing that they do. They even have toys and things like that. So communities, that's what they identify, you know, in the U.S., all the signs and things like that. So how do we combat that? We do a lot of local, personalized, small media campaigns, you know, because we cannot compete with all those big medias, but we can compete within our communities and things like that. We translate things, a lot of the sign at the store, things around there, eat smart, and also like the cost of food. So our challenges right now is looking at nutrition recommendation out into the community, because this is what the community, okay, is coconut milk good or not good, right? That's a debate that is related to, is egg good or not good, right? So things like that. But how we get that narrative, is good that they're asking, right? Because they're asking those, it's good that they're asking. The other thing is the cost of food, you know what I mean? So we have all these campaigns for $20 you can get this, but you can also get this, right? So we send our students out to do things like that. So local, personalized, and small media campaigns are something that we find a lot of success over. So on top of that, at that third layer on environmental settings, so this is actually e-buy. So if you look at, there's not a lot of plants and things like that there, but we do a lot of work in this. I only have 5 more minutes. So community changes, we actually changed the workplace. We actually, this e-buy, the island that I showed, we had to bring in soil from California. We didn't even have enough soil to grow anything else. So this is the place where they have a community health centers, and they actually have food right outside the pharmacy. So there's a pharmacy and FAR pharmacy. So you pick up your medication for diabetes, and then you pick up all your fruits and vegetables, because you have consultation with the doctor and a nutritionist at the same time. So let's have all of this. We also have young cooks. We actually have cooking classes in elementary school all the way up on local traditional foods. And then this is the food cart in Hawaii, that we have a program that take the food and go around in a community, so the food comes to you and then they sell it. So we love students. Put them to work. But then how do you measure like all those community changes, right? There's all these different programs and stuff like that. So there's a tool called Change Tool, but we are in the process of taking the tool, because we've been working on that tool of making it more specific. Because as a community researcher, I want to see if all of that is going to affect our community. How is it working out for us? So we use this Change Tool. I'm, working with Riz, please help me, with, looking at the change, how to revise it for here too, working with your community. So objective of the change tool, we have steps around it, and then at the end, and there's a rating scale, like is this going on in your community, yes or no, and the community figure out what the score is. So that e-buy, that island that I show you, the change to result, when it comes to policy, they move from 22% to 55%. So this is 0 to 100. On a system score, 20 to 55, and environment. So it's very hard from a community that you find this is a community where 100% of their food came from outside, to now they say 30% of their food now they grow it, so this is a place. They also have system change. It was like the pharmacy is behind there, then you come, the nutritionist talk, you listen, you pick up your fruits and vegetable, and you go and do that, so it's part of that systems change to change with the nutrition. But then there's also individual factors. The environment can change, but if you cannot, because of your personal stuff like that, we find out there's a lot of emotional around food. Shame, denial, no hope, passiveness, sadness, and things like that. So that's the reason why we do lifestyle change program, the Pacific style. So all of this stuff, we are, results of our cycle 1 is coming up. But, around the science, a modest change, 5 to 7% of your weight will decrease diabetes. We do gestational diabetes. But a lot of it is because we just started right now. We started 20 years ago with all of this environmental change. So in moving forward, I always go back to my Pacific culture. So even though I speak more, a lot of the Northern Pacific languages. I worked there all my life and lived there also. I also look at our Pacific culture. So there's different wisdom. Tofa is a Samoan word for wisdom. So there's a Tofa Loloto, that deep wisdom. Manino is clear, but then also Tofa Mamao, that, long distance wisdom. So, 150 years of your institution, awesome. You have Tofa Loloto, your Tofa Manino, but then it's time for us to look at the Tofa Mamao, looking forward for the health and well-being of not just Pacific people and residents of, Aotearoa, New Zealand, but also the rest of the region. I actually look at you guys as a role model, big brother, of a lot of the things that we do is actually from your place, and I thank you for letting us use it. We adapt a lot of stuff for the Pacific, and that's my time. I would say fa'afetai, komotata, and mahalo.